Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm reviewing BlackkKlansman. This is Spike Lee's new film and it stars John David Washington, Adam Driver and Topher Grace. And this is a true story of an African American cop who via the telephone starts a rapport with the Ku Klux Klan, and they, due to what he says and his interest in what they're doing, they ask to meet him. So what he sets out to do is go to his superiors. He's trying to prove himself within this sort of police force, being the only African American cop within that particular town. So what he subsequently does is he asks the help of a white cop to pose as him. So he does the phone call stuff and creates rapport with the group via the phone, and the other cop, played by Adam Driver, is going to be what they see and who they interact with. So it's really about these two men forming this. Ultimately, it's about these two men forming this one identity in order to try and infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan to get to the bottom of feared war and violence that is about to erupt within the town. So it's really about Adam Driver's character trying to infiltrate this group and see what's sort of happening within that. The superior officers let him do this, and they form a particular group trying to get to the bottom. There's also a Black Panthers movement happening within the town as well, with a lot of the kids from the university, and one particular female character is the leader of this group, and she's trying to create awareness and bring a lot of the African American people together within the town and provide support and fighting against the repression that is inflicted on them through the cops and a variety of other people within the town. So the film is set in the 70s, so there's very particular things that were happening at the time, such as the Vietnam War and people wanting a peaceful thing and fighting against that war, and also the Black Panthers and the race riots were happening at that time. So it's really about these guys trying to form a case about the Ku Klux Klan from the inside out. Now the character they sent in, Adam Driver's character, he's actually Jewish, so he's pretending to try and not be Jewish because they don't like Jewish people as well, or African American. So it's really about him denying who he is in order to become part of this group and to try and stop any craziness from unfolding, anyone getting shot or hurt in any way. So it becomes a race against time trying to form this case around this particular group known as the organisation within the story, and it's about them trying to form this case and stop any bad things from happening and stopping this race fight that they believe is going to happen from escalating and exploding on the streets of their particular town. There's a particular character played by Topher Grace called David Duke, who is like a grand wizard within the Ku Klux Klan, and he's also trying to move into politics. So he's trying to form a group with strong-minded people and fighting against what they feel is their white America. And so he's sort of the leader within this group, and he comes and inducts people, recruits into this sort of thing in a particular ceremony where they all wear the clothing, the hat, the robes. Unbeknownst to him, the person he's actually talking on the phone is not only a cop, but they're African American cop. Ron, his name is. It's just interesting, you can't sort of tell by the conversation because John David Washington changes his voice, and so he doesn't really know that he's an African American guy. He assumes he's white. So that continues to disguise who he is and showing how easy it is sometimes to trick people just by changing your voice. So ultimately it becomes a race against time to stop these things from happening, and things unfold in a certain way you don't expect, and it's really about these two cops trying to prove themselves, trying to build a case against this sort of thing and try and stop the violence they worry about for happening. And it's really about them trying to stop this from continuing on and trying to create change within that and trying to make a difference in what they're trying to do and accomplish. That's all I'm really going to say about the plot. There's a lot in it, so it's best for you to go and sort of see it if you want to know what happens, rather than me telling you everything that happens. It's just sort of a basic sort of thing. So ultimately it's just about an African American cop with the help of a white cop infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan in order to build a case. Look, this was a really interesting film. I think it's important in many ways. Yes, it was set in the 70s, but there was so many things within it that Spike put in there that were relevant today. such as his references to Trump, his references to Charltonville, what happened there, his particular reference to a lot of other things happening. And it really is trying to say that people believe racism doesn't exist anymore, but it does. It just is taken on different forms. It still exists, and they're still fighting to stop racism, but it's just always there and just in different forms and not as in your face. It's very subtle what he puts into this. He's saying a lot, and I think this sort of what he's saying is important, very important with what's transpiring in this world today. And I think Spike, most of his films he has something to say, but in this it feels like he really has something to say, a lot to say. And it's very different to his other films, such as films like Malcolm X, where it's very hard pressed what he's talking about, and it's sort of pretty full on and put into the audience's face to sort of take in, and it's quite shocking and surprising at times when he does that with his films. Where this one was a bit more subtle with it, and it felt like he was trying to reach a wider audience, and that it was important for him to express how he was feeling, what he was going through to a wider audience, to express what he really wanted to say within this and to reach a much wider audience than his previous films had. And I think this is one of his best films in a while, and I was very impressed with it. It was a film that I had to let sit for a while. I had to think about it and sort of sift through it a bit, because there's a lot in it, and I was sort of blown away by what I saw, but I needed to really take time out and have a think about it. It's a film that sits with you and stays with you for a while, long after you've seen it, because of the subject matter and because it's looking at racism and violence and how the world has changed, but it's still very similar in the things that is going on. I think he's crafted a really, really great film here. It's a little slow in pacing, and the pacing is somewhat up and down. It doesn't have a particular pacing that moves the story around quickly. It's more of a fly on the wall look at this sort of world and this story and what was happening at that time, and this particular uniquely different concept of trying to infiltrate a particular group known as the organisation. I think, like Black Panther, I think this film is important in its subject matter, talking about racism, talking about what's happening in the world, and the repression that is happening with people. Yes, we're not living in the 1950s anymore, and things have changed, but things are still the same, especially to do with racism. It's still there under the surface, just a bit more subtler than it used to be, but also more violent sometimes in what transpires, especially with Charltonville and all that sort of stuff that transpire with that, and the neo-Nazis and the African Americans fighting against each other. And I feel this film has some really powerful moments in it, a really well acted and put together film. And I think it's an important film that should be seen by everybody. So with the acting, I was really impressed with everybody who was involved in this. John David Washington, Denzel Washington's son, does a really great job here. This is sort of one of his early movies, and I think he's really solid here. The thing with him though, he sounds so much like his father. It was very hard sometimes to see him as someone different to his father. But in saying that, he does a really solid job here, and it's really interesting to see him portray this particular character, and he does a great job. And I'd really like to see more of him and see what else other roles he can do, and probably do a bit more with Spike, because Spike Lee sort of is able to use him quite well within this film. There's also a African American lead actress in it who does a really great job as well. The casting is really brilliant here in what he does. Topher Grace is really interesting in this role, playing David Duke, and playing a character I haven't seen him really play before, and he does it so well without all the sarcasm and humour he usually uses, but he shapes his character really well, and who is based on a real person. Adam Driver, I think, really steals the show in this film. I really like him. I've liked him from the beginning. Every film he's been in, I've really liked his performances. He's very real and brings a real sense and reality to the particular roles he plays. You believe they're real people. Not some sort of character that's created, but actually real people. And he's really great in this sort of film and does really well. And his chemistry with John David Washington is really great, and they work off each other really well. And he has some really powerful moments and scenes in it. The character's Jewish, but he's trying to hide that and trying to let the Ku Klux Klan know that, because he doesn't want to be killed or hurt in some way because of this. In one particular scene, they go about getting a Ku Klux Klan membership card in order to go to cross burnings and be involved in the organisation. And he sort of gets this card and he looks at it and he starts to tell this little bit of a story that he didn't grow up Jewish, but he was always felt drawn towards that sort of and drawn to who he is and the heritage of his family and being Jewish. He sort of talks about how he's never really thought about it, but now it's sort of, he keeps thinking about it more and more because he's in this situation where he has to keep denying he's Jewish in order to prove himself within this sort of thing, to organisation, to be undercover. And it's really hard for him, and it brings up things in him he never expected. And I think what Spike really does well here is he looks at two sides of the argument, so to speak. So he looks at the African American side and the way they're treated by police, the way they're repressed, and the racism that happens towards them. But it also looks at the cops and the Ku Klux Klan as well, and showing them as human beings, as people, and showing the contrast between one and the other, and how these two groups heading towards some sort of explosive thing, some sort of fight, something's going to happen between them. And I think he does really well of showing both sides. And I think that's really impressive, actually. And I think this is really great. To me, watching this film, it felt like Spike Lee had evolved as a filmmaker. He felt a lot in the early days of a lot of anger and frustration about things that transpired and the way African American people were treated and are continuously treated, and the racism that has happened. And as the more films he's made, the more stories he's told and more interesting his career's become. But I think this is a pinnacle. This to me is up there with Malcolm X, which I think is his masterpiece, and a project he was very passionate about and had to fight to get made. And this film really is sort of very close to that sort of film. The more I thought about it, I didn't know what to make of the film when I first saw it, but as I sat with it and thought more about it, I came to a realization with a lot of stuff. Thought this film was really fantastic, and I got a lot out of it. There's some really powerful scenes within this film. There's a particular scene with an old actor singer, Harry Belafonte, who really sort of has this pivotal scene where he begins to tell this story of how when he was younger, his friend who was mentally handicapped was accused of raping a white woman and was arrested and ultimately killed in a very, very brutal way. Things that transpired for this and the things that happened to him and the fear that Harry's character really felt when this was happening. And by him telling this story, I didn't know whether it was something that really happened or if it was just part of the character created, but what he had to say was quite powerful, and the way he delivered it just felt very real. There was no visuals with it, there was just him telling this story to these Black Panther movement university students, and it's so powerful and shocking and sad what transpired to him, the way he was attacked and beaten and all these sort of things that happened. And it really shaped Harry's point of view, the character's point of view, on what's to transpire. And all the things that this particular character went through, all the brutality he suffered, was all due to a film that came out that had a big impact on the white America. So W.D. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. And this stuff within this, they ended up using in these small towns, the abuse that the African American characters within that film suffered was used in reality in such a brutal way. But it's such a powerful and pivotal scene within the film and serves a very important purpose in the story. And why this is happening, there's another particular scene where they're inducting people into the Ku Klux Klan, and as part of the initiation, they make them watch Birth of a Nation. And just to see their perspective of this film after he's told this such powerful story is a very interesting sort of thing, juxtaposition of each of them, and you get to see both sides. And yeah, it's quite powerful scenes. I don't want to give too much away because it's a film you really need to go and see and experience. And I've decided it's absolutely on my top 10 of the year because I was very, very impressed with what Spike Lee delivered here. Now, there are a few little criticisms I do have about the way the story's told, not story in particular, just the way it's sort of told. There just doesn't seem to be a huge emotional impact for me. Particular scenes, yes, and a lot of stuff that happens in the film, but it just didn't have the emotional impact that I expected, that I really felt Malcolm X had. the real power in that and the particular scenes, I felt this film was missing it a little with that. And when it first began, it took me a little while to get into it. Once they got into infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan, the case continued on, then it became very interesting. Now the pacing of it's a little up and down. It sort of starts strong, sags a little in the middle and gets better, but it is still very interesting, and the story, watching it, is very important. The other criticism I do have a little bit is it just felt like it was building to something really big that was going to happen, and I just felt it just didn't quite get there with it. There isn't a particular event that does happen, which is, leads these two groups of people towards. It just wasn't as impactful as I felt it could have been. But in saying that, after I thought about this film a bit, I realised something, that I think Spike Lee was making this film in a way that was more observing this, a fly on the wall, rather than making it extraordinary or powerful and stuff. He just sort of told the story, the real story of what happened and what transpired in this town with these characters. Yeah, it's like he wasn't trying to make this extravagant or anything. It was just telling a simple story, but with his input and his visuals and his ideas within it. And I felt that's what the point of the film was. It didn't need to be powerful and it didn't need to be huge, and how extraordinary this story was and how these things transpired within this town. It was quite a story I've never heard of. And they explain why a little bit within it. And there's a particular scene at the end where they talk about focus on issues that are happening today. I don't want to give too much away, you'll have to go and see it to see what I mean. But I think this film is so important, it's so well done and so impressive. Look, final verdict. I think this is a really powerful film and needs to be seen. I think it sort of fits in the realm and can be I think it is as important as the Black Panther film that came out and what that was saying and what that was accomplishing. And I think this film is as powerful as that, and it needs to be seen by a wider audience. It mightn't be for everyone, but I do recommend people to go and see it and just let it wash over you. Don't try and analyse it or think too much or try and work it all out. Just sort of let it wash over you and just experience it. It's a very powerful and well-made film. Spike has outdone himself here. The acting is all solid. It's a very interesting story. It's wonderfully shot and made, and a very impressive film. And there's particular techniques that are used film-wise that are really impressive as well. Look, I'm going to give this film 4.5 out of 5. I was very impressed with it. I felt it was important and I felt it was well done and put together. And I was glad I was able to experience this film. And it's a film I'll probably go back to and watch a bit more and try and get a better understanding of what I liked and what I didn't like about it. Overall, it was a very impressive film and I was really impressed with it. It's a film I'll probably analyse a bit more as time goes on and try and get a better understanding of what I did witness and what washed over me, what I allowed to wash over me, and what I experienced within the film. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've heard here, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.